Cathal Summers.
And I'm Deirdre Glynn,
your Teagasc Sustainability Advisors, and you're welcome to the Teagasc Environment Edge podcast, bringing you the latest information, science and opinion to improve farm sustainability.
Pippa Hackett, Minister of State for Land Use and Biodiversity, joins us on the show to discuss the challenges ahead for farming and how we can meet them head on.
With organic farming and planting of forestry well behind our national targets, what plans are being put in place to encourage and support farmers to address this challenge? We have some excellent examples of results-based payments projects across the country. However, many farmers do not have access due to the local nature of the projects. Does the government have any plans to make these type of schemes more accessible?
With environmental issues very much to the fore in agriculture in the last few years, I started off by asking Pippa, what supports will Budget 2022 deliver to farmers to help improve sustainability?
We've worked hard to get the budget we have, and look, it's up 2% on last year, and that also includes the COVID and Brexit supports of last year. So that's quite a significant achievement. I have to acknowledge my colleague Minister Charlie McConalogue on that to deliver that. Look, we've maintained obviously the mainstream agri-environmental schemes. We've continued supports from GLAS, BDGP. So that's gives farmers, I suppose, confidence and security for next year. We're still obviously in this transitional period in advance of the new Common Agricultural Policy, which should begin in 2023. But in addition to those measures, we also, I also secured an increase of 5 million for the organic farming scheme. Look, we've huge targets to meet there. We're going to have to throw a lot of money at it to incentivize farmers to do that. And look, there will be. We also had some very successful small-scale farm and biodiversity projects that we funded this year, 24 of them, and I was really thrilled to secure another 5 million for those. We spent 3.5 million on the ones this year, so that's going to enable, I think, a lot of exploratory work, innovative work on farm, and involving communities also. And I think that's really invaluable. We've seen the success of some of those larger scale projects, such as the Bride project and the Hen Harrier and the Curlew. So I think these smaller scale ones give, maybe smaller groups an opportunity to try out something that they might well know works on their farms, but have never really had the opportunity to do that. So I think there's lots in the budget.
I think you're through nearly 630 million or something at scheme work alone, and then all the additional stuff in the budget as well. I know probably COVID was a bit of an issue as regards the purse. Would you have liked to done a bit more, do you think?
I don't think so. I think we've done a pretty good job, and I think look, all roads are leading to the new Common Agricultural Policy, and really, I suppose, after this budget now, the focus absolutely turns to that. I mean, that process has been ongoing now for the last nearly 2 years in terms of designing a new Common Agricultural Policy and what the plan will look like. We're coming to the end of that process, and I think, look, we'll have exciting developments in that also.
Great. And you mentioned organic farming, and I suppose we've had a podcast with our specialists on this a few weeks ago. And Ireland, I suppose, I know you're from an organic farm yourself, I think. So Ireland are probably, I think we're at around 2% compared to our European counterparts. We're a good bit behind. Is there anything, I suppose, that we can do, or what do you plan to do, that are supports and structures to be put in place maybe to try and reach those targets?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, we're really at the bottom of that table across the EU, which is really disappointing because we've a brilliant country and an ideal, I would say, climate and landscape to do much more organic farming. But look, I'm here to try and change that. We put extra money into it for 2021, and look what we got. We I suppose recruited, if you like, another 300 odd organic farmers into the scheme. We're going to have to really double down on that and ramp up those numbers if we were to attain our programme for government commitment. You're right, the EU commitment is for 25% of the land in the EU on average by 2030. Our programme for government commitment is for 7.5%, which was the EU average at the time of the negotiations. But that's still a massive task ahead. But look, we're very committed to do it. The department's committed, the government's committed to reach that target. And look, it's going to be lots of promotion. It's going to, lots of engagement between farmers, peer-to-peer, knowledge transfer, and also look supports in the way of through the organic farming scheme, which we have seen extra money put into that for next year, an extra 5 million, and that's going to ramp up and up over the next, for the Common Agricultural Policy period as well. And I think this year was difficult with COVID. We didn't have any, organic farm walks. I suppose interaction with farmers was more difficult. And then we had other measures that might have enticed farmers another way, for example, the REAP scheme and even the straw incorporation scheme if you're a tillage farmer. But look, the REAP scheme is a pilot scheme that's not going to be the scheme to necessarily carry on into the new Common Agricultural Policy period. So I think, look, it's a challenge. I'll admit it's going to be a challenge, but I think it's an exciting challenge. And look, we're going to have lots of money to put at this. So if farmers want to be in the environmental scheme, sign up for organics.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point to make as well. From what we find on the ground, there's a big knowledge gap or knowledge transfer gap, in where some farmers are interested, just maybe afraid to take that plunge because it is quite different in the type of farming you have to do.
It is. And I think, for some farming types and enterprises, it's more difficult than with others. But I mean, I think there's examples all over the country of all types of farming enterprises, having either converted recently to organics or have been organic for many years, decades, in fact, and there's a huge amount of knowledge there. And I think there's a fear of change and a fear of doing something different. But with that comes a bit of excitement as well. And, plenty of organic farmers I meet are just delighted they took the plunge, if you like, and it's reinvigorated their love of farming.
For sure.
I think Teagasc as well as our specialist team are doing great work and knowledge transfer and the educational piece around it as well. I suppose it's about, making connections, people getting to meet each other and discuss it and talk about it.
Absolutely. And just on that, just to maybe finish, I mean, look, the work of advisors here is absolutely invaluable. But yet that peer-to-peer thing sometimes just solidifies it for a farmer, right? I've been advised to do this and I've been shown how I can do it, but, hearing it from the horse's mouth makes it just much more tangible and palatable.
Couldn't agree with you more. That's what we always say to farmers, that we could say something a million times, but when a farmer does something and shows another farm how he did it, look, it's worth its weight in gold.
So the forestry sector, I suppose, at the moment, it has high targets as well for planting, and it's struggling, I suppose, to meet those targets at the moment. So how do you plan to encourage landowners to commit their land to planting, and what trees do you think that we should be planting to meet our biodiversity and carbon targets?
Yeah, you're right, Deirdre. It is a challenging place at the moment, forestry, and has been for a number of years. Look, we are working towards getting forestry on a much more solid footing. We are on the cusp of a new forestry strategy for Ireland, which we need to design in not only in consultation with direct stakeholders involved in the sector, whether it's industry or farmers themselves or landowners. Obviously, the NGO sector is important here. Communities are hugely important, and we've seen, some terrible tales of situations in different parts of the country, maybe Leitrim, Cavan, Kerry, different areas that where communities just feel obliterated by forestry. So we have to correct all of those. But you're right in terms of, I suppose, regaining farmer confidence and trust in forestry. That's a big challenge. I recently had a conversation with the Minister of Agriculture in Finland, where it's the total opposite. Like they've massive area of forestry, maybe 70% of their land is forestry. And look, you're not considered to be a farmer in Finland if you don't have forestry, whereas here you're almost considered to be less of a farmer if you have forestry. And there's a big cultural shift required. But I think that could be eased. I mean, you asked about what types of trees and that. I think there's opportunity there for farmers to plant much smaller areas on their farms. And look, we see maybe a little bit more of that. We might see more of that in the new agri-environmental schemes as well. So it's not necessarily always commercial either, because I think it's those big blocks of commercial forestry that really challenge everything, challenges the environment sometimes if it's in the wrong place, and it's challenging for communities. And it's to be honest, I want to recognize farmers who have planted in the past, because now they're sometimes portrayed as, the bad guys here. They took the plunge maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago, longer. And now there's such negative connotations around forestry. And I just want to say, look, keep going, because look, we put our faith in you as a state to do that, and we will hopefully be here to support you as you come out of that. I think perhaps, the programme for government commitments around forestry are quite broad, and there's a lot of. I think the general direction we're looking at is try to, establish a more close to nature type of forestry, and one that's multifunctional. So, and maybe part of that is more of a continuous cover model rather than the sort of short rotation cropping we see. I say short rotation, you're talking 30 years, but, it's the up and then clear felling is a challenge, and that's a huge challenge on the environment as well. And when people grow up even with a very big commercial forest near them and then it's clear felled, it's quite traumatic for people who live around that, so there's all sorts of angles here to look at. But I think certainly more small scale planting. I think agroforestry we have not really touched in this country at all, very small amounts of it, whereas over throughout Europe it's quite widespread, and that mixing of crops or stock with trees, I think we have to embrace that, and more small scale planting, and just really try and change that cultural attachment or disattachment for forestry in this country. It'll take time, but I think we can do it if we consult enough and engage enough and listen enough. I think it can be done.
I think a lot of people kind of realise now that we made mistakes where we put forestry in the past, be it on blanket bog or whatever, but we're rectifying those at the moment. I suppose the big thing I would find is that a farmer thinks that you put a forest in, it's for life and the land is gone forever, and that's probably that change of mindset you're thinking of.
Yeah, I think so. And I think if you think about a longer term, if you thought that actually planting trees on your land was potentially adding value to it in the longer term, rather than maybe just up to 30, 35 years time. And then you're sort of, okay, you get a very big lump sum, and that's wonderful at the time, but then you're plunged back into it again. And it's your children's generation then who have to maybe wait and wait for that. So I think if there was a slightly more continuous model adopted, I think then you're always getting something from your forest. Once it's established and you're taking timber out of it every couple of years, I think that might be an easier approach. And look, that's what's done in a lot of European countries. They're far more established than we are. We've very young forestry here, and that's part of the difficulty as well. We have to shoot it all up and reach all these targets for afforestation, and maybe not thought about what it meant in 30 or 40 years time. And we have to make those decisions now. So what's forestry going to look like in Ireland over the next 50 and 100 years, and get that on a really good, solid, I suppose, really, really good footing.
Yeah, look, there's so many co-benefits. Even where we talked to a lot of people on the podcast here, you're talking everything from having trees in the farm for buzzards, for rodent control and owls, even stuff from control ammonia emissions. If you have it around the farmyard, it's very beneficial. And for myself and Deirdre, we often talk about water quality as well, trying to, I suppose, break pathways. It's really helpful. But just going back to something you said a few minutes ago, Pippa, about results-based payment schemes, and you mentioned the Bride project, and there's lots of really good ones around the country. We're big fans of them. I think they work really well. The one thing I don't like about them is the fact that they're very, I suppose, selected for certain areas. So say, for example, there's certain counties that you don't have the option to get into them because the scheme just doesn't happen to be in their area. So do you have any plans going forward, or are we kind of waiting for CAP to see what comes up, or will we roll them out maybe to try and incorporate more of the mainstream farmers across the country?
No, I think you raise a good point, and I suppose the background to many of those results-based were landscape-based approaches. So the Bride obviously was a catchment area, like the Hen Harrier areas are specific areas, and they're massive areas because the Hen Harrier itself has quite a large, territory, if you like, and where it hunts and nests and so forth. So I suppose they were based around specific either habitats or species. And but there's no real reason why you couldn't have a results-based payment for other areas that may not have a special species, because there's results-based payments you could do for any sort of water quality measure. You can results-based payment. I mean, if you look at the REAP scheme, I mean, the results-based payments around that are in terms of hedgerow quality or trees, or if you've delivered on a for example, like a multi-species sward, I mean, that's a result. And if you connect that with whatever environmental outcome you're looking at, you know, you're sort of there, and you don't necessarily always have to have a special habitat or be in an SPA or whatever. So I think there's I think there absolutely should be options around that. And I think for many of the farmers, well, you know, most of the ones in most of those schemes they might have been a bit tentative at the start getting involved, because people didn't quite know how am I going to get paid and what will I get paid for. But I think the ones that have engaged with it really get it. And I don't think it's a difficult concept to get once you're in it and you see it. But I think for, you know, most of the farmers in the country aren't really in any results-based scheme. So it is going to be a little bit of a challenge to bring everyone on board. But I don't see why we can't have more results-based outside of, as you say, those very specific areas or landscapes. Because I mean, ultimately at the end of the day, I'd love to see the whole country have some sort of special feature, even if it's not it doesn't mean you can't farm. We absolutely have to farm, but we absolutely have to farm, you know, in tune with nature, and it can be done. We've seen it working in certain areas, and there's no reason why we can't see that across the country.
I think it's a good thing as well that we're moving away from those prescriptive type of schemes as well.
Yeah, you know. Absolutely. And I think, look, we've seen EU auditor reports haven't been very kind on a number of our schemes. And I think we have to really take cognizance of that. I mean, at the end of the day, we're spending taxpayers' money, and taxpayers want their money, yes, to go to farmers, absolutely support farmers, but to deliver more in the environment. And we have to be cognizant of that, because, you know, a reform at EU level could shift around that funding if it's so desired, you know. And I think that we really have to make it work for us, and I think we can.
Yeah, and look, a farmer, if he implements something on his farm, he wants it to work, or she wants it to work for them as well. It's important to have a sense of achievement, even to get something done.
Absolutely. And I must say, just the sense of look, recently on our own farm, for example, we saw a juvenile owl, which we haven't seen. You know, my husband's been there since he's a child, and he's maybe seen one flying along the road 3 miles away. And he was just the sense of, oh my goodness. And we don't know what we've done, if you like, to bring an owl, a breeding pair of owls onto our farm. But whatever we're doing seems to be working. But now we're going to actively pursue that. And we've had bird watching different groups, and they're going to help us put owl boxes up and stuff. But I think that sense of, like, we've got an owl and you don't have an owl. And I think all farmers get a little bit possessive over what's on their farm. And I think
Cathal will be very jealous.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and so if rather than worrying about maybe how much grass you're growing, let's see what else you've got on your farm that you can boast about.
We have barn owls here, Pippa.
Oh, do you? Oh dear, I'll have to find some other bird now.
Even there's a chick buzzard outside my window. The noise of them for this summer, but it's great. It's great to see it. You're dead right. It's lovely to see it around the farm. And
they're all, I mean, I suppose what maybe many farmers mightn't understand, it's not that you've got a barn owl, it's an indicator species of a very hopefully healthy ecosystem, that there's plenty of voles or mice or whatever he might be hunting on. And I think it's just, you know, that if you can get that sort of level of understanding and knowledge, that's why it's important to have that, because it means everything else is in line. That's good.
100%.
I think there's something exciting in that for all farmers, you know.
That's true. We know how important rewetting and rehabilitation of our bogs is, you know, to carbon sequestration and biodiversity. So how do you hope to achieve on this?
Well, look, the government, I mean, the climate action plan is going to have, you know, big, I suppose, ambitions in relation to the rewetting of farmed peaty soils. And look, I appreciate that it's strikes a bit of fear into farmers and what's going to happen, and my field's going to be flooded and that. And I think I don't think it necessarily is that. I think it's about a lower intensity management. It might be blocking drains, and you mightn't have, you know, cattle out 24/7 all year round. I mean, they probably don't anyway, but it might be a bit more sensitive way to manage that land. And it's about, again, getting, I mean, firstly you need to, I suppose, get the buy-in, but the buy-in comes with understanding why we're doing it. Look, I launched at the end of last year, and actually into this year, the two, I suppose, project or pilot project EIPs in the Midlands, looking specifically at, you know, how we manage drained peaty soils. And I suppose that was the terminology around it. It's about management rather than, it's not about abandoning and walking away. It needs managed to be functional. And, I suppose those results will help inform us over the next number of years as to what works. Again, part of this is working with farmers and seeing what, they understand their land better than anyone. They'll know where the really wet bits are, or where they maybe even saw a wader, for example. And this could be about supporting biodiversity as well as dealing with, carbon emissions. And even, for example, there's a very special ecological area where like a mineral soil would meet a peaty soil, sort of transitional area it's called. And there's good examples around, for example, Clara Bog in County Offaly, where you have a really relatively intact raised bog. But you have farms on eskers literally around it. And, 100, 200 meters from the edge of the raised bog, you have mineral soils, which are managed in a fairly standard way, because it's growing perfect grass and, there's cattle on it. But there's a special area that transition between the raised bog and the mineral soil, that it's of a high special ecological status. So some of that work is going to be looking at how we manage that. And again, it's all to inform us in the years ahead. And I suppose I would anticipate some sort of rewetting, low intensity management scheme, in the next round of the CAP. But again, we don't have really many details on that just yet. But I think, look, we're going to have to look a bit more at that. It is a commitment that the Climate Action Plan wants us to deliver on. But, we'll work with farmers and listen to them and see how we can do that.
Yeah, I think farmers would appreciate that, definitely.
Yeah, I think so. And I think I think what I've learned a lot, in the last year and a half, but certainly when you speak with farmers in upland areas who were sort of plonked with a designation and they never were told why, really, it was never explained to them why. And you just want to avoid anything like that. It's not fair. It's not the way to do things. And sometimes when things are explained, like to any of us, if we're explained anything in advance, it makes it easier and we understand it more fully instead of just getting told.
So with COP, or the Conference of Parties, starting at the end of October, we'd love to meet up with you again, Pippa, to discuss it and to hear what progress has been made at it. So Pippa, thank you very, very much for taking time out from your extremely busy schedule to chat with us today.
Thanks a million, Pippa.
Thank you very much. It's been great. Thank you, Deirdre. Thank you, Cathal.
That's it for this episode of the Teagasc Environment Edge podcast. Thanks to Pippa Hackett, Minister of State for Land Use and Biodiversity, for joining us on the show.
Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe to the podcast. You can listen on Apple and Google Podcasts as well as Spotify. And for more information, go to the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie. I'm Cathal Summers.
And I'm Deirdre Glynn.
Join us next time for the Teagasc Environment Edge podcast, Signpost to Farm Sustainability.